questioned and challenged at any point. So if you're sitting thinking with a question, please just pop it in the chat, or just unmute yourself and butt in. I absolutely don't mind. We've got a kind of discussion thing at the end. I've got something in the middle which might be interactive if the software actually works, but please just feel free to interrupt. And colleagues are going to be monitoring the chat. So again, if you have a question, just pop it in. Don't wait till the end when you've forgotten it. Okay, so my brief this morning, this is what Lynn told me 10 days ago that she wanted. Can you please cover these things? Can you cover the importance of very early development? Can you cover what babies and toddlers need from us as adults? And can you explore this mind-mindedness concept, which has appeared in Realizing Ambition for the first time? And can you do all of that in 45 minutes? So, well, we'll give it a go. Let's see how we get on. So that's the agenda for this morning. If you're not that interested in babies and toddlers, because you work mostly with older young children, thank you, Lynn, for the heckle. The same stuff will apply to older children, so please just tag along. Right, so let's do the first thing, the importance of early development. And here's where I get a bit psychological, because I'm going to say, who is this important to? Who is early child development important to? And whose ambition are we trying to realize? So let me try and show you what I mean by that. A traditional discussion or presentation along these lines would do this kind of stuff. I'd show you some confusing brain pictures with a really small brain on the left and a really big brain on the right, and we'd say, ooh, look what happens. I'd show you some studies linking something or other at 18 months to later outcomes. Yeah, so I'd the ability to jingle keys at 9 months, I would link to the probability of having, I don't know, liking mushrooms when you're 35. That kind of thing often gets talked about. I mean, seriously, we can predict quite a lot of people's lives from their language skills at 18 months. So if you're working with 18-month-year-olds, that's actually quite an important thing. I'd probably add some neuroblah, wouldn't I? I'd talk about ACEs. I'd talk about epigenetics, probably, if I really wanted to go beyond anything that I understand. And I'd probably show you something like the Heckman curve. And the Heckman curve, if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to show it to you in a minute. But it is just showing how much more effective early input is than later input. How important are the first 4 or 5 years of a child's life? So you'd see diagrams like that. Oh gosh, here's synaptic growth, here's synaptic pruning. What does that mean? You tell me. We'd have studies like this showing that attention skills at age 2 are very, very strong predictors of maths and literacy attainment in primary. So it's obviously really important to help children with their early attention skills. And then these often get into a little bit of a story about people doing things right and people doing things wrong. And it can quite often drift into what parents are doing wrong, is where these discussions often go. And then we sometimes have ideas of ELC almost as a kind of compensatory thing. We're here to close those gaps. We're here to provide what families can't. And I don't like where that kind of discourse goes, to be perfectly honest. And, oh, here we are. Here's a Heckman-like curve. And we might talk about sensitive periods and look how all of those pile up in the early years. There's a problem with thinking this way, and I've sketched out some of them. It is all true. I'm not going to show you that stuff, but it is all true. It's also not true, or it's a little bit misleading. So sensitive periods, well, yes, but development happens through the life course. I am still picking up a lot of language skills. I have every hope in the next decade of picking up quite a lot of social skills that I haven't quite managed to pick up in my first 5 decades. I'm hoping the second jab is going to do it for me. It must have some effect on my social skills. So they're kind of true, they're kind of not true. Those things about brains growing connections and then pruning connections. I mean, yes, but what's the leap from brain structure to whether we're living a happy life? It's also kind of not true and misleading. And I think most importantly, it's not the most helpful bunch of truths to think about when we're thinking about early child development. Because what does it say about children? It means it's all about their futures. Why are the early years important? Because if we get it right, kids will have a great future. Well, how about now? Yeah. What else does it say about children? It says that if we do the right inputs, they'll turn out okay. The Heckman curve that tells us that early development is more cost effective than trying to patch it when they're 12. Their economics, their costs. So let's come back to why do we care about early child development? So I want to tell you a story of 4 different people to show you why early child development is really important. So, meet Alice. Alice is 25 years old. And here is Alice. She is a scientist. She is at her workbench, beavering away. And Alice has a question. She wants an answer to this question. Now, I don't understand. Well, I understand some of those words, but I don't really understand the question. But what she's trying to do is she's trying to come up with a drug that will block COVID-19. She's trying to come up with an antiviral drug. And there are loads and loads of Alices around the world doing that. So that's her question. So let's think about what she needs in order to make progress in answering that question. Well, she needs to use complex language, and she just has, okay? And she's gone beyond me with her complex language. She needs to be able to imagine and plan sequences. So she's doing her experiments. She needs to think, if I add this, then that, then the other, what's going to happen? And she also needs to work with others, not just because she needs to borrow the test tube, but because this is a huge collaborative effort with many, many brains working together to try and make us safe from this horrible virus. She's also got to manage stress. There's a pandemic. It's really urgent to get this work done and to get it right. She's got to manage that stress, but she's got to manage day-to-day stresses. Maybe today my experiment will work. No, it didn't. And she's got to pick herself up and use patience and say, what am I going to do tomorrow? She's got to handle loads of complex info. She has lots and lots of different choices of where to go in her work. Should I try this route? Should I try that route? She's got to select, and she's got to keep track of where she is in her study all the time in a really complex environment. She's got to do lots of wondering and imagining. She's got to think outside the box. She's got to think, what will happen if I do that? She's got to make connections between stuff she knows about biology and stuff she knows about chemistry. And she's got to keep going. She's got to have a basic belief that she's going to get there in the end. She's got to coordinate a lot of actions, pouring one test tube into another. She's got to do spatial cognition. She's got to use lots of metaphors. So she's thinking about, how does my chemical bind onto a virus? She's using some spatial metaphors there. She's thinking of these things as little gears and cogs that stick together. And lastly, she's got some beliefs. She thinks she can do this. She thinks she can make progress. She's thinking of herself as a learner. She's learning all the time from her mistakes. And she's got all these scripts for how to do that. She can look stuff up in books. She can ask other people, and she can help other people along their way. And she's got a whole shed load of prior knowledge. Okay, she's studied a lot of biology and a lot of chemistry, so she knows a lot about this stuff. So that prior knowledge, where does that come from? Let's go back a bit. Meet Belinda. Belinda's 15. Belinda has a different question, equally baffling to her and equally baffling to me. She wants to know, how does she factorize that expression? She's sitting in her, let's call them assessments, because that's what we call them now, isn't it? They're not exams. No, they're not, ladies and gentlemen. Teenagers are not doing exams. And she's thinking, how do I do this mathematical operation? Now, what does she need in order to do that? Well, we can go around the circle again, because she's using quite complex language. She's planning sequences, so she's moving things around in her equation. She's probably going to be working with others because she's not going to manage this herself for the first time. She's going to be puzzling this out. Most people find solving equations moderately stressful. She's got to manage that. She's handling complex information. She's selecting alternatives. What do I do? Keeping track of where she is in her calculation using technology, like writing it down as she goes along. And I don't have to labor that she's doing all of these things too. And she's going to do a lot better with her equation if she sees herself as learning and thinks she can do it, and if she knows how to seek help. She also has a shed load of prior knowledge to help her with that. She knows what an equation is. She knows what a number is. She knows all of that stuff. So let's go back in time and meet Charlie, who's 3. Now, Charlie is probably the happiest person on this video call at the moment because Charlie has a pile of leaves. And Charlie wants to know, well, Charlie wants to know a lot of things, but her main broad question is, what can I learn with this pile of leaves? What can I do with this pile of leaves? It's going to be interesting. Pay attention to my language there, because I'm going to come back to this. What can I do with this pile of leaves that will be interesting? Okay. Now there's a balance here, because Charlie's using some language which is complex to her. But if she's going to get the most out of this, she's also surrounded by some complex language. She's surrounded by some others who are saying words like wet, damp, crinkly, big pile of leaves. They're saying whoosh as she jumps into the leaves. They're saying never mind when she twists her ankle. in the leaves. There's some sequencing going on. If I jump into this pile, what will happen? And she's getting help doing that. There's a bit of managing stress. It turns out to be a really stinky, moldy pile of leaves. So there's a bit of stress to manage there. And the adults around her are managing stress too, because they know they've got to clear up this blooming mess later. But in the course of that, they're supporting Charlie's stress regulation. There is some handling of what to her is some quite complicated info. And it's getting more and more complicated because some leaves are more squishy and stinky than others. And why is that leaf pristine? And why is this leaf squashy and stinky? What's going on? There's selection of which inquiry to go and keeping track. There's remembering from yesterday when the leaves are dry and now they're wet. What's happened? Wandering and imagining, making connections. You'll probably notice children with leaves, for keeping going and trying again isn't really a problem for them. No? No. So that's going on. I don't have to labor this. There's lots of coordination. There's lots of spatial cognition going on and being built. And there's a sense of self-efficacy. Why? You're making your mark on the pile of leaves. You are changing your world. You are pulling leaves around. You're manipulating your world and seeing what's happening. You're discovering some scripts for learning. Those of you who've been trained in the model for improvement have a very basic script for learning, which is basically change something and see what happens. And that's exactly what Charlie's doing at the age of 3 with a pile of leaves. She's learning some scripts for learning. And she's also learning some scripts for help seeking when she twists her ankle and someone picks her up. She's also drawing on an awful lot of prior knowledge. It's funny you should say that. Let's go back in time and meet Daisy. Daisy has some keys. Someone is holding some keys for Daisy. Let's look at what's going on. Daisy has a whole bunch of questions. They're not expressed in words yet, but I will go 9 rounds with anyone who says that Daisy doesn't have a bunch of questions about these keys, about what's going to happen if, and she's really interested. What's going on? Adults are saying things like jingle, jangle. Adults might be showing simple sequences. If I shake, this will happen. If I pull them away, this will happen. She's already working with others with the keys because she can't hold up the keys by herself. She needs someone to do it for her. There's managing stress. Initially, here's a new thing, keys. She's got to manage that. Then there's anticipation. And now they've taken them away again. So there's disappointment. There's patience. Look how many times a baby will bat some keys or choose some keys in order to explore them. There's persistence. There is some complex information growing here. There's some selecting alternatives. Do I bat it this way? Do I bat it the other way? Do I chew it? Do I bat it? Keeping track of what's going on. There's some wandering, imagining, making connections, keeping going. Again, that's not usually a problem with babies and keys once they get stuck into it. See the coordination, watch the development as she gets better and better at manipulating the keys and planning her actions. She can't describe it in words, but some thoughts are forming about how the world works. And these other things are going too. And there's a lot of prior knowledge, which I'm going to come back to in just a bit, because you're thinking 8 months, what do they know? Well, that's the wrong question, and I'm going to come back to that. So what am I trying to show you here? I'm trying to show you that they're all doing the same things, and they're all developing the same things. And they all actually need roughly the same things from their environments in order to develop those things. It's a great shame that I can't say, can you see what it is yet, that catchphrase has been devalued, but you can probably guess. Oh, look. And that's why Realizing the Ambition talks about these 6 aspects of development. And that's why these aspects of development are so important. And that's why early development is so important. And you can kind of see this growth of complexity that happens through life. And here's what Realizing the Ambition says about it. This makes life in ELC both really simple and incredibly skilled. We're always doing the right thing if we're aware of each child's development and are providing interactions and opportunities that match that. And the sting in the tail is the blue thing, rather than expecting a child to fit into a fixed and predetermined program or plan. So why is early development important? Yes, there's the stuff I was flippant about earlier, the population stuff for futures evidence, for building of brains, the first 1,001 days, building resilience against adversity. All of those things are true. But more important than that is early development is important because it's happening, because it's important to the child. It's important to Daisy. It's important to Charlie. And so it is important to us. And that's why realizing the ambition is a rights-based approach to early learning and childcare. It's important to the children, so we provide it for them. And I'll come back to this in just a moment. But for now, my second brief was, what do babies and toddlers need from adults? And I think it's quite important to realize that this is a strange question. It's a question that we tend only to ask about children. What do babies and toddlers need from adults? And there's a concept here that kind of helps us and kind of gets in the way. And I want to be a little bit provocative about whether this is a useful concept or not. And I want to show you an alternative way of thinking, which runs all the way through realizing the ambition in every single chapter. We talk about things being developmentally appropriate. So that takes us back to that question. What's developmentally appropriate for babies and toddlers, we might be asking, because we want to get it right for them. We want to do the right things. So we tend to use this kind of language. Where's the child developmentally? And once we know that, we say, what do they need in their environment? And we'll say things like the next steps. And that leads us into particular ways of thinking about children and acting with children and recording what we're doing. So I've just put up here the Centre for Child Development's milestone tracker app. Yeah, there are loads of these things. Probably in your settings, you have some spreadsheets and you have some graphs and you have some stuff. In Highland, we use some really nice designed multi-agency developmental overview. And I'm not mocking these things because they do sort of help to know where the child is. But they also sort of don't, because they can lead us into some quite rigid thinking. And realizing the ambition is offering something different. It's saying, don't look, I don't know why I'm pointing at my slide so you can see me pointing. I haven't solved, if I point there, does that do it? Is that the right way? Or is that way? Okay. I'm turning into John Travolta. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so yeah, it's useful to have these kind of milestone trackers. It's useful to know how much language they can understand, because then we adjust the complexity of language. It's useful to know if they can stack one block on another, because we adjust our expectations and so on. Of course it is. But there's a slightly different approach here, which is to look at what they do, to make suggestions about what they're feeling, to listen to what they're saying, and I'm going to suggest a little bit later to listen especially to what they're asking us about, to work out what they require from us in terms of interactions and experiences. So this is a bit different. This is looking at this child now, what they're doing, thinking, and talking or asking about. So that's not looking up in the developmental table. It's a much more free flow thing. And there's a reason for that. Thinking about developmental stages can be really useful. My mother had to ring my Uncle Fergus and ask him to stop buying me jigsaw puzzles when I was 12. Okay, so it's important for jigsaw, for birthday presents. Okay, don't buy me, I don't know, a toy for a baby. Don't buy a baby a Ferrari. It's kind of obvious, isn't it? So it's useful, but it's also not so useful because in an important sense, shock horror, the stages aren't real. These developmental stages aren't real. A lot of milestones aren't real either. Let me illustrate this for you with one of my favorite topics, which is the consumption of vegetables, which is a live topic in this household at the moment. Here is a map. You're going to think I'm mad when I show you this, but there's reason behind this. This is a map of vegetable consumption per head in the different countries of the world. Okay, and it's actually really interesting in its own right. I got fascinated by this yesterday. I spent a whole morning researching this. It was such a waste of time, but it was really interesting. So basically, the darker color, the more vegetables people eat. And if you look at that on a country basis, you can see differences. So there's a big difference between Portugal and Scotland. They eat way more vegetables than we do. But what happens if you zoom in? We're going to find some Scottish people who eat a lot more vegetables than some Portuguese people. Yeah. So as you zoom in, these countries start to disappear. If instead we drew a map of where are the people who eat 5 vegetables, we'd get a slightly different map. And you're not telling me that as you cross the border from India into Pakistan, there's sudden shift in how many vegetables people eat. So it's a zoom in, zoom out thing. When we stand out from the world, we see countries. When we zoom in, we see individuals who are all very different to each other. And just to make it even more complicated, they're eating different vegetables too, and different vegetables are better for you than others, I am told reliably. I can't just eat carrots. I like carrots. Why have I got to eat broccoli? So applying this to developmental stages, and this is the only bit of heavy theory of today, I absolutely promise. At a population level, if you measure thousands of children and observe them, you see stage-like development. It's linear. It happens one thing after another, and we can write down progressions that show that. We can show, for example, stages of block play. We can show stages of language development. We can show stages of social understanding. So we can see solo play, parallel play, cooperative play. I can't remember the stages, but you'll be able to remember them. And we see sharp milestone transitions. We see moments of revolution. It looks like children move from being concrete operational to being whatever the next one is. If we go down to the individual, if we zoom into individuals or small groups, it's not stage-like at all. It's messy. It's all over the place. And you'll know that just from watching kids. It's backwards and forwards. It totally depends on what they're doing. Some kids are going to be super advanced relative to themselves, doing something that they really like, and they're going to be completely hopeless doing something else. I'm great at cooking meat. I'm rubbish at cooking vegetables, okay? It's that kind of comparison. Also depends on the environment and what's around them. Depends most decisively on whether there's an interested other human being around. That really, really brings kids on. It's back and forth. It's often circular or U-shaped. Some of you will have noticed babies, when they start to crawl, they forget how to sleep. Yeah, it's all over the place. Sometimes it goes in circles, sometimes it's U-shaped. Watch children exploring balance. They get really good at balancing a beam, then they get rubbish at balancing a beam, and then they get really good at balancing a beam or a block because they're reworking it in their heads. And there are many, many small moments rather than sharp boundaries. These milestones that go click, it's actually an accumulation of many small moments, which is where we're so privileged playing with children, because we see those happen and we record them and we share the wonder of that with families. We see these small things. Okay, so how's that helping us? It's coming back to this question of what do babies and toddlers need from us? And the answer to that question is not what do they need because they're a toddler, but what do they need because they're a person doing this stuff in front of me now. So here are the key quotes from Realizing the Ambition, and this absolutely wonderful one, which I absolutely love. We will always be doing the right thing if we're aware of each child's developments and providing opportunities that match the need of a child. Match that child in front of you, not the stage. So in a way, the question kind of goes away. How do we know what to do for babies and toddlers? We know what to do with babies and toddlers because we're human beings and we interact with them. I'm going to put a bit more flesh around that in a minute. But before I do, I want to do the kind of grounding, and I promise I'm going to pause in about 2 minutes and give you something to do. Just oh, I forgot to say at the beginning, I've got a handout. I'll send you a link to the handout. So I forgot to say, you don't have to write anything down. You don't have to listen. You don't even have to be here. You can just have the handout. But I'm going to pause in just a minute. But I want to talk about the developmental theory that runs through Realizing the Ambition. Now, there's several points really clear in the text that Realizing the Ambition doesn't endorse any particular developmental theory, any particular approach in ELC, because none of them is complete. If you're Froebelian, great, but it's not complete. If you're a culture-based interactivist, great, but it's not complete. But there is a way of thinking about child development that runs through Realizing the Ambition. And it's a really, really simple one, and it's really easy to share. And it's in chapter 2, the image of the child. If we can sort out in our heads what we think children are and what we think children are like, everything else follows really, really easily. And I'm going to try and demonstrate this to you. But first, I would like to know your image of the child. So I'm going to put this in the chat. If you can open another window or just pick up your phone and just take yourself in a browser to menti.com. And if you enter in this code, this should work. Okay. And I'm just going to ask you to complete this sentence as many ways as you can. Children are what? And just one word answers. Children, you might say children are horrible, children are enormous, children are, just fill it up with words or whatever you think. And I'm going to try and put this on the screen, and it should kind of all populate and share, which may or may not work. Let's see. Have you got a thing?
Oh, it's saying no active question just now, James.
Oh, drat the thing.
No, it's okay. Try again.
No. What have I not done right?
It's back. It's on now.
Is it on? Okay, give it a go.
Thanks, you.
I think I had to put it on to present, which I've done. So let's see if that works. Are you able to access it now?
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. I love it when it does this. It's so exciting. So just give you a couple of minutes. Just put in as many as you want. Okay, any more? Ooh. Yeah, so what's coming through? We have amazing. Can you see the word cloud? Is that, yeah, great. We've got amazing, curious, individual, funny, individuals, fascinating, hilarious, hopeful, inspiring, joyful, ambitious, mischievous. Yeah, love it. They are emotional beings. So there is your, we're in West, aren't we? Yeah, West momentary attack. So I have family in East, so I had a momentary panic. This is the West Dunbartonshire image of the child growing here in front of your eyes. And really that's the rest of the presentation done, because the question is, okay, if babies are like that, if toddlers are like that, what do they need from you? What do curious toddlers need? What do inquisitive ones need? Resourceful ones? That's interesting, isn't it? Because resourceful ones maybe need us to provide a little bit less than ones which are helpless. Okay, so that'll keep growing, and I'll come back to that so that we can see it later. Just bear with me while I get lost on my computer, because I want to put the presentation back up. Hold on. 2 seconds. And I share with you partly because it's sometimes a really nice thing to do with a team or with yourself when we've got lost in the complexities of early childhood. Just come back to, what do we think children are? And it can unlock an answer. So what I'd like you to do is take you through what the three main developmental theories have in terms of an image of a child, because it's going to help us to interrogate them. So I'm going to start with constructivist approaches, which are the kind of dominant ones. This is Piaget and co. And it's a really lovely image of a child in this kind of thinking. They're seen as active. They're seen as exploring their environment. They're seen as competent. They're always acting on the world, building their concepts. And they're seen as meaning makers, trying to make sense of the world around them. And this particular vision of childhood has a particular role for the adults. So what does this kind of child need from adults? They need us to provide a really, really interesting environment and not mess them about. So we need not to interrupt their construction of thoughts. We need to not interrupt their building of concepts and their experimenting on the world. We can help by providing them with the materials, but essentially children are creating their knowledge through interacting with an environment. The second dominant theory, the Vygotskian one, sometimes called social and cultural. This includes all that's in the Piagetian approaches, because those are all absolutely true. Children are like this. But the Vygotskian approaches also add that they're social beings, and they're interactive beings, and they're cooperative beings. And that adds this other element, which is children are often more able with a skilled other. So children can build their concepts deeper and faster if they're interacting with someone who is a little bit further on than they are. And that changes what the adults do. Because yes, we still provide and mediate the environment, but we also interact in order to scaffold that environment. We can help a pile of bricks turn into a castle, or into a wall, or into a pile of bricks, if that's what the child wants it to be. Then there's another layer, because that's all true, but there's another layer, and this is the layer that Realizing the Ambition talks about quite a lot, which is cultural participation. And this adds this, that children are part of our world. They don't live in an isolated space, which is childhood, or they only have done comparatively recently in the Western world. They're part of our world. They're change makers. They are people who have thoughts that they want to share with us, and they want to share our thoughts. And again, that changes a little bit what we do, and it changes a little bit how we see what's happening. And I want to flesh that out a bit. I'm going to do it with two examples. One is theoretical. We can see developmental schemas in three different ways. We can see them in that Piagetian way, where they're kind of basic, very, very early, not quite concepts yet. And children are largely internally driven to stick these things together. So there's something driving them to carry stuff about, throw stuff, put things in circles, put things inside other things. It's all internally generated, but it's not yet really thought. It's the foundation of abstract thought. Or we can add another layer, which is Vygotskian, which is we say these children are actually thinking while they're doing this. It's already conceptual. May not make much sense to us. We haven't got a clue why they're doing that, and we never will. But it's already conceptual. And it's much more influenced by what's around them, and it's much more socially influenced. They're going to carry stuff around because they see us carrying stuff around. That's where these things come from. Yeah, it's a social participation. Or we can add a third level of richness, which to see as cultural, where it's not just about concepts, it's not just about thinking, but it's about meaning. So we're looking at children engaging in meaningful activities that they value, and they're actually taking part in culturally valued activities. Let me show you that difference with this. I love this sequence of tweets, partly because these are both absolutely brilliant practitioners and they tweet such good stuff, but it shows the contrast really, really well. So here's Katrina. Block play is so important, it's vital, you know, and we know why, and there's lots of theory around block play, and that's fine, and the cleaning takes a while. Tracy, our blocks were being used within play as iPads last week. And that for me is a collision between cultural understandings of development on the one hand and constructivist on the other. The children have taken our lovely, pristine, totally developmentally appropriately designed things, and they're using them as cultural objects, as iPads, in very, very rich play and very, very rich learning. There is a particular school of thought that might go, tut, oh no, children, screens, arg, ghastly, they should be doing this pristine developmental stuff. I hope I'm starting to show that we're missing a huge richness from children's lives if we start to do that. So let's apply this to dressing up. Kids love to dress up from a certain age, very hard to stop them. From a kind of trad developmental point of view, we'll talk about the developing imaginative play. We'll talk about how they start to sort of decouple, so they can see themselves as dressed as a fireman, but they still know they're a child. We know that's really important for lots of things, lots of thinking about social interactions and so on. We see them as developing inclusions and categories. You know, so people dressed as firemen put out fires, they don't cook, that kind of stuff. So they're actually developing categories doing this, and we talk in that way. If we're taking cultural approaches, we'd say, look at these kids, they're taking part in meaningful activities. They're doing stuff that we do, but in their own way. Because adults dress up. Yeah, you've all dressed up. I've dressed up. I put on a tie for this. I mean, you know, I'm dressing up. I've put on a role, let alone when we're talking about acting and other things. They're trying on social roles. What's it like being a cook? What's it like being a wizard? What's it like being a doctor? They're also questioning those roles. Yeah, boys shouldn't dress up as ballet dancers. Yes, I'm going to dress up as a ballet dancer. They are questioning some of those roles. You can't play in the kitchen if you're dressed up as a fireman. Why not? There's some questioning going on there, and they're exploring the actual costume and all it means, and rehearsing some of those scripts and finding out about them. So there's a whole layer of richness from thinking in this way, but it comes from thinking about children in a particular way. So what do we do? And this is going to be the breakout activity, just to flag it up. I'm just going to give you, these are what kids are like. So what do children who are like that need in terms of interaction experiences and spaces? What kinds of environments match children who are like that? But I just want to briefly circle back to, I'll come back to that, mind-mindedness, which is the missing link behind all of this. And it's caused loads and loads of questions putting into realizing the ambition, and that's good, because so it should, because it's a really important concept. So what is it? It's kind of the up-to-date version of attachment theory. So it includes everything that everyone knows about attachment theory, but it updates it. And when I say update, it's been around in research for about 20 years, but it's only just starting to come through into education. And again, it's about an image of a child. So to be mind-minded is to have a sense of a child as thinking and feeling, of having thoughts, of having plans, of having ambitions, of having questions, of having feelings. And that's what grounds this get out of jail statement in realizing the ambition of what do the children's actions, emotions, words tell you about what they require. So it's thinking about children as having this really, really rich inner life, which is very, very like our own. And then responding with what we call attunement. So responses that just match our sense of what's going on in the child's head, and using mind-minded language. That was annoying to have dropped the whatever on your foot. That must really hurt. That's mind-minded language. It's attuned mind-minded language. It's not attuned if a child actually found it funny. Yeah. So if they've knocked over your beautiful water table with all your stuff where you're going to do all your Piagetian conservation, and they think it's funny, saying that was annoying, you're not congruent. You're not being mind-minded. You're not joining them where they are. It can be really hard sometimes. So the reason I didn't start with this is it's woven through realizing the ambition, because look how mind-minded this is. So active, well, you know, rabbits are active. They're not meaning makers. Rabbits aren't more able with other skilled rabbits, you know, who are better at eating grass or whatever else rabbits do. Let's not go there. They're not shared thinkers. They're not changing their world except by eating it and filling it with more rabbits. This is mind-mindedness. This is what it is. A really simple way of thinking about this, trying to make this memorable, because it's a really abstract concept, but I want to try and make it memorable, is this really rubbish spot the difference competition. What's the difference between a child and a washing machine? And the answer is not washing machines are even more annoying and unpredictable than children. That's not the answer. And it's just this really simple thing. If you can say something about a child but not about a washing machine, it's probably a mind-minded question. So when my washing machine shrinks my socks or dyes all my shirts, it's an interesting shade of green. I don't ask about the feelings of the washing machine. I don't ask about its plans. I don't ask about whether it wanted to do the washing in the first place. I don't ask about what the washing machine could learn from this experience or how I could interact better with my washing machine. But I can ask those sorts of things about children because children have minds. So let's spot the difference. Here's a washing machine question for behavior. How do I get him to? Which has the same kind of feel as how do I get, what program should I use for my washing machine to stop it shrinking my socks? What's the input to get the output? Mind-minded behavior question is, I wonder what he finds difficult about. I wonder why he's scared at bedtime. I wonder what it is about broccoli that tastes horrible to him. I wonder why he's hesitant about joining in at story time. Completely different thing. How do I get him to sit still at story time? Washing machine question. What is it about story time that's difficult? I wonder if he's bored. I wonder if he's not interested in it. I wonder if he finds other children really irritating. Those are mine. Can you see the difference? We'd never ask that kind of stuff about a washing machine. Okay, let's be a bit more provocative and do it with learning. Washing machine question, what's the right experience? What's the right input? What should I turn the dial to? What's the next step? Do I put it to spin cycle now or do I not? Which schema? How do I look up from my program about what my washing machine should be doing in order to adjust what it's doing next? A more mind-minded way of saying the same thing and capturing the same value but with so much more richness is, what's he interested in? What does this activity tell me that he's interested in? What might make it even more interesting? So he's really interested in carrying stuff around. What could make that more interesting? Heavier stuff? Stuff that's harder to pick up? There's loads and loads of ways we could make that more interesting. Do you see that contrast? I'm really overdrawing it. So let's think about these keys. What are the keys to these different groups of people? How does it relate to their ideas, their thoughts, their feelings, their plans, their questions? Alice, question, where the hell are my car keys? I've put them down somewhere. Belinda, I have my independent house key for the first time. It's about confidence, creativity, and curiosity. It's about being me. Charlie is just starting to explore locking and unlocking things. He's also discovered the delight of hiding keys from Alice so that Alice can't find them. Keys are a different thing to Charlie. They're a different interest. The baby, maybe keys are a musical instrument. Maybe they're a cause and effect toy. Maybe they're an interesting feel. The same object can be different things to different people. And this is where I think we need to change our focus. We talk a lot about engagement. I think we need to start changing our language towards interest. How do we make what we provide more engaging for children? How do we engage boys in literacy? How do we engage young children in story time? How do we interest? What are they engaged with? What are they interested in? Can you see that subtle shift of language? And it changes a lot how we think. And then it makes planning really easy because we say, what are they exploring? What will make it more interesting for them? We don't have to figure out a next step. We just have to think, how can we change this, make it a bit more fun? Last point, you'll be glad to know, is how many minds are we talking about in mindedness? And this is a problem we have when we talk about young children because we think about individuals. Again, realizing the ambition pushes a little here to think of shared thinking. So that last quote in bold, learning is a cooperative process between children and adults where children borrow adult knowledge and skills. So back to these guys doing their different tasks. And remember I kept saying, and a lot of prior knowledge. I didn't say a lot about that. And it's a bit of a trick because you might think that's their knowledge, but it isn't. It's the knowledge of all the people around them too. It's someone who can tell Alice exactly how to do that experimental procedure. It's a parent who knows that if you shake keys up and down, they jingle in an interesting way. Baby doesn't know that, but baby knows now. And that's this idea of borrowing adult capacity so the child can learn more than they could by themselves. Which brings me back to this slide I had in the wrong order. Just bear with me. This one. This stuff's simple. Play and talk together. We go up and down this ladder where we're seeing children enjoying what they're doing. We might verbally label what they're doing. We might join in and follow their lead. We might then offer a new idea, and we go up and down that ladder with children. And realizing ambition includes this really nice quote: all participants are active. No one has all responsibility. No one's passive. If we have a sharp contrast between child-led and adult-led, we're missing some of the point about children's social learning. Okay. So this is how it works in guided participation in all these different areas. Firstly, you do it for me. You jingle the keys. You help me manage my feelings when I'm hungry by feeding me and comforting me. Then you do it with me. You help me stack up the blocks so I can reach the thing on the top shelf. Then I do it with you. I start stacking up the blocks, but I need you to help me lift them. Then I can do it. And that's the process of guided participation as things get richer. And again, it's a different way to think about development. It is moving towards more independence. There is a ladder, but it's also deeper participation. Children are gradually coming deeper and deeper into our shared lives. So we move from jiggling car keys to driving cars. And in a way, this is my wind up for Lynn, in a way we're not being ambitious enough yet in realizing the ambition. Because we talk a lot about learning and development, and I think the next stage is going to start talking about thinking. And just look at these changes of language. Instead of Daisy's developing sensory motor skills, what questions is Daisy asking through our actions, emotions, and vocalizations? And if we can look at babies and toddlers and just think, what questions are they asking about the world? What questions are they asking me through their actions, emotions, and words? We'll know what to do. Okay, so breakout time, hooray.